What would you do if suddenly you couldn't hear out of one ear? Well, that happened to me a few weeks ago, and to be honest with you, it scared the living shit out of me. In this episode, I'll walk you through my sudden hearing loss journey, what happened, what the evidence says about treatment, exactly what I did step by step, and where I am today, what the outcome is so far. And along the way, I will share some clips that I recorded in real time throughout all of this. This might just be one of the most detailed video and audio explorations of sudden sensory neural hearing loss that you'll find from both the patient's chair and through the lens of evidence-based medicine. In fact, I was totally taken back, completely surprised by just how many people are affected by sudden sensory neural hearing loss, yet the dearth of high quality information that exists online to guide those that are experiencing this. Whether you have experienced sudden sensory neural hearing loss yourself, or you're going through it now, or you're just curious about hearing and health, or you just want to follow along with this gnarly experience that I've been through, I think you'll find this episode eye-opening and informative. So let me take you back. On Tuesday, July 29th, I suddenly lost hearing in my left ear around 11 a.m. in the morning, straight after my morning workout. I'd spent the weekend before snorkeling over at Catalina Island off the coast of Los Angeles with some friends. There are some epic kelp forests over there and lots of cool sea life. And then on Sunday, I was wake surfing in a lake north of Los Angeles. So my first thought was that maybe I had some water trapped in my ear. And my partner, Tawny, stopped at the pharmacy and got me some ear drops, and I used them on Tuesday. But by the time I woke up on Wednesday, it was not better. In fact, it was worse. What I would now describe on Wednesday morning as a completely deaf or mute ear. I couldn't hear a single thing out of my left ear, which, if you've never experienced this, is a extremely bizarre, strange feeling. I remember walking outside, hearing birds chirping and being unable to determine whether the birds were to my left or to my right or even behind me. And I walked into a loud coffee shop and I was unable to separate the background noise of music and people talking to the voice of the girl working at the register. Noise really became a chaotic, scrambled mess. I can vividly remember being in the grocery store and just nodding, pretending that I could hear the girl at the checkout, trying to avoid conversation so I could just pay and get out of there. And that gave me this sense of feeling trapped and frustrated because I wanted to interact, but as a newly deaf person, I couldn't. I had no other symptoms, no vertigo, no pain, no ringing in my ear, at least not at that stage. Nothing except unexplained hearing loss in my left ear. Realizing that this wasn't normal, far from normal, in fact, I started calling ENTs in Los Angeles until I was able to get hold of one in Santa Monica, who fortunately squeezed me in for an appointment that day on the Wednesday. So on the Wednesday, the ENT took my history, looked into my ears, nose, and throat, and then conducted a pretty basic hearing test using a tuning fork that he described himself as a poor man's hearing test, which could help him determine if this was a middle ear or conductive hearing issue or more of an inner ear neural hearing issue. Quickly, he determined that it was an inner ear issue, and he said he was pretty sure that I had sudden sensory neural hearing loss. That was the first time that I'd ever heard of this. His advice was to start high-dose prednisone, which is a corticosteroid, immediately, 60 milligrams per day with a taper to follow. And he warned me about the insomnia and the weight gain, but stressed that this was the most effective treatment, especially if started within 3 days of hearing loss. So going to the ENT promptly proved to be a very good decision on my part. And that's my first take-home message for you. If you ever experience sudden hearing loss, get to an emergency room or to an ENT straight away. The sooner you get treatment, the better. I asked the ENT what my likely prognosis was. What's the expected outcome here? Remember, my hearing was perfect just a day or two earlier. And his response really took me by surprise. He said that 1/3 of people with sudden sensorineural hearing loss do not get any improvement and could be a candidate for a cochlear implant. 1/3 get moderate improvement, but may need a hearing aid. And then 1/3 get full recovery. We'll come back to this in a moment. In addition to the oral prednisone, it was recommended that I went and did an audiogram, which is really a fancy name for a hearing test, to understand how much hearing I'd lost and to monitor improvement over time so we could have a baseline. It was also recommended that I get an MRI, and I worked out, being an Australian in the United States, that the best way to get one would be by going to the ER. I started the oral prednisone at 60 milligrams per day on Wednesday afternoon, which was about 28 hours after I first noticed hearing loss, and I was able to book the audiogram appointment for Friday. When I got home that Wednesday afternoon, there was a package on my doorstep. I'm often sent things from brands that are interested in working with me so I can try the products before I potentially do a partnership with them. When I saw who this package was from, I couldn't help but laugh. Here's a clip that I recorded from that moment. What I found was really, really ironic, and I had to laugh, was I came home and there's a brand that over a week ago, through Voicing Change Media, my ad partnership agency, they said they were going to send out earplugs, loop earplugs to protect your ears. So yeah, I can't think of a more ironic thing to come home to after my audiogram and being told I have severe to profound hearing loss, acute hearing loss, and that the prognosis is not amazing, although there are people that do get full recovery, and that's the space I'm living in. And yeah. So yes, I did have to laugh at that one. Thank you to Loop Earplugs for bringing a smile to my face when I needed it, who are not a sponsor of this show, but perhaps they will be in the future. We'll see. Okay, coming back to our timeline, the next morning, Thursday, again with what I would describe as 0% hearing in my left ear, I proceeded to go to ER to get the MRI, which is the recommendation in the sudden sensorineural hearing loss medical guidelines. After waiting 12 hours, I managed to get an MRI thanks to the incredible medical team at UCLA Health. And I also had a second opinion with another ENT. And just to be clear, I wasn't complaining about the 12-hour wait. It was clear to me that the ER was full, inundated with acute stroke patients who were, of course, much more of a priority than me. My MRI, which was done with and without contrast, came back normal, ruling out any type of tumor or inner ear hemorrhage. The ENT in the ER repeated the tuning fork test and agreed that it looked like I had sudden sensorineural hearing loss. She recommended that if the results of my audiogram showed profound hearing loss, that I look into intratympanic corticosteroid injections to stack with the oral corticosteroids that I was already taking, and also hyperbaric oxygen therapy. Well, actually, I'm pretty sure she said in combination with, not stacked. That was me editorializing. And alongside the oral steroids, the ENT prescribed an antiviral called valacyclovir. Some researchers think that sudden sensorineural hearing loss might be triggered by viruses that can lie dormant and reactivate under stress. Large clinical trials and systematic reviews haven't shown that antivirals add measurable benefit when combined with steroids. In other words, they're not considered an evidence-based cornerstone treatment. And in fact, just to be clear here, the guidelines recommend against routine prescription of antivirals, vasodilators, so drugs that open up blood vessels, and thrombolytics, drugs that dissolve blood clots, 2 patients with sudden sensorineural hearing loss. But, and this is a big but, there is some soft evidence from smaller studies, some of these are preclinical, looking at viral serology that does suggest a viral role in at least a subset of patients. And because of that, many ENTs will still prescribe them early in the acute period when someone develops sudden sensorineural hearing loss without a clear cause, essentially as a just-in-case kind of measure. And I had taken antivirals before without side effects, so I was comfortable adding this in. Most importantly, and I want to underscore this, underline it, highlight it, taking valacyclovir, which is sort of outside of the box, didn't detract from me pursuing the interventions that are well supported by the evidence, namely oral corticosteroids, intratympanic corticosteroid injections, and hyperbaric oxygen therapy. The antiviral was simply an add-on, low risk with a potential upside if a viral trigger happened to be involved. The ENT also referred me to a few specialists who could do the corticosteroid injections. And with some gentle pushing, and this is where advocacy matters. You really do have to speak up for yourself or have someone else speak up for you. I managed to secure an appointment for the next day. At that point, with a 1 in 3 chance of getting my hearing fully back, I essentially hit pause on everything else in my life. Friday became about confirming the hearing loss with an audiogram and then going and getting my first injection. My mindset at this point in time, where I tried to live most of the time, was that I would throw everything at this and I would focus on only things I could control and let go of everything else. After my recent episode with Dr. Sharon Berquist on good stress and the power of phytochemicals, I've been getting more intentional about getting these plant compounds into my daily routine. One simple way that I've been doing this is with Peak's Pu'er tea, a fermented tea naturally rich in polyphenols and prebiotics that support gut microbiome diversity, reduce oxidative stress, and benefit metabolic and cardiovascular health. Importantly, unlike most teas, Peak uses cold extraction technology to preserve these very bioactive compounds that we're talking about, so you actually absorb them and then get the downstream benefits that we want. And the best part, it's instant. No steeping, just mix into hot or cold water and enjoy. I've been starting my mornings with Peak's black Pu'er tea for calm, steady energy, and the green Pu'er tea for a clean, focused lift in the afternoon. This tea is sourced from 250-year-old wild trees that are incredibly rich in phytochemicals, and every single batch is screened for toxins, pesticides, and heavy metals. Peak is offering my listeners 20% off for life on their Pu'er bundle, plus a free frother and glass beaker. Head to peaklife.com/Simon to claim the offer. That's peaklife.com/Simon. On Friday, August 1st, 3 days after I first noticed the hearing loss, I had my first audiogram at Kirsch Audiology in Santa Monica in Los Angeles. It showed a severe to profound flat sensorineural hearing loss in my left ear with 0% speech discrimination at a very loud test level. Functionally, that meant that I was deaf in my left ear. And for those watching on YouTube, I'm now showing my audiogram report from this Friday morning on screen. And if you're listening, I'll walk you through this. To simplify things, there's 5 main takeaways from the report. I had about 70 to 90 decibels hearing loss across all frequencies. This places the loss in the severe to profound range. And the loss was considered a flat loss, meaning that all frequencies, be it low or high, were equally affected or almost equally affected, rather than sloping or hearing loss that just affects high frequencies, or rising where hearing loss just affects low frequencies. Everything from the sound of a high pitch squealing coffee machine to a low pitch, like a loud motorcycle engine, I couldn't hear it. And it's this speech discrimination or lack of, along with the hearing level, which together led to a diagnosis of severe to profound hearing loss. Otoacoustic emissions were absent, suggesting significant outer hair cell dysfunction. We'll come back to hair cells a little later on. Acoustic reflexes were also absent, which is consistent with profound inner ear damage. Tympanometry, normal type A, which ruled out middle ear causes like fluid or wax or perforation, which along with the tuning fork test that I mentioned earlier, points to an inner ear problem rather than a middle ear problem. Together with these results, my MRI results, and also my clinical presentation, it was deemed that I had idiopathic sudden sensorineural hearing loss. Even though I suspected it, seeing it in black and white was pretty devastating. And I could tell it wasn't easy news for my audiologist to deliver either. With a somewhat clear diagnosis in hand, you better believe that night I went down a research rabbit hole, digesting just about every single research paper that I could find on this topic, at least every main clinical trial. And an important thing that I learned was that the prognosis depends heavily on the severity of hearing loss. Not everyone with sudden sensorineural hearing loss has the same degree of loss. People range from mild to moderate, severe, and profound hearing loss. Those with more mild to moderate hearing loss generally do better. So when you see summaries that say about a third fully recover, those figures are from mixed groups that include lots of milder cases. For cases like mine, severe to profound hearing loss with 0% speech discrimination, the chances of complete recovery are much lower. There's mixed figures out there, but generally speaking, it's accepted that rather than it being about a 33% chance of full recovery, it's probably actually less than 20% if you have severe or profound, certainly profound hearing loss. As you may imagine, upon learning this, I was pretty gutted. And while I did keep telling myself to live in possibility and focus on the controllables, all of these things, all of my mantras, I would be lying to you if I said it wasn't something that kept creeping back into my mind. I knew that now the odds were well and truly stacked against me. That was a fact. One moment I had my full health, I had my hearing, the next it was gone, and whether it would return would be revealed to me in the coming weeks. What I did have on my side was that I am relatively young. I'm in good health. I don't have diabetes. I don't have hypertension, etc. And I started corticosteroids extremely quickly. And just by being here, we've all beaten the odds at least once, right? So what exactly is idiopathic sudden sensorineural hearing loss? Sudden sensorineural hearing loss is defined as hearing loss of at least 30 decibels occurring over at least 3 consecutive audiometric frequencies and lasting at least 3 days. It affects approximately 1 in every 4 to 5,000 people per year in countries like Australia and America. So not as common as something like the flu, but essentially just as common as a disease like type 1 diabetes, for example, affecting a lot of people per year. In America, sudden sensorineural hearing loss affects about 66,000 people per annum. Because it's a bit of a mouthful to say, it's often abbreviated to SSNHL. But to be honest, at least for me, I don't find that much easier. So that's what sudden sensorineural hearing loss is defined as, but what causes it? It turns out that a specific etiology or cause is identified only about 10 to 15% of the time. and the majority of cases are deemed to be idiopathic. Idiopathic simply meaning that the exact cause is unknown. It wasn't a tumor, it wasn't a stroke, we don't know. And sensorineural meaning that the problem wasn't in my outer ear canal or middle ear bones, but it was deeper. It was in the inner ear where sound waves are turned into electrical signals for the brain to receive. If that sounds a little complex, perhaps this is an easier way to picture it. Think of the cochlea, which is that snail-shaped organ in your inner ear, like a piano keyboard. Each key represents a row of delicate hair cells, each tuned to a different pitch, from low bass notes to high treble. When sound comes in, the keys get struck, and those hair cells convert vibration into electrical signals that travel along the auditory nerve cable, the plug that connects the piano to the amplifier, and up to your brain where you actually hear sound, where you interpret that signal. With sudden sensorineural hearing loss, two things can go wrong. Sometimes it's as if whole sections of the keys, those hair cells, just stop working. That's the hair cells being damaged or silenced. Other times, the plug itself, the auditory nerve, gets disrupted. So even if the keys, the hair cells, are working fine, the signal still doesn't leave the piano, or doesn't leave as well. Either way, whether it's a key issue or a plug issue, a hair cell issue or an auditory nerve issue, or a combination of both, the end result is the same: loss of hearing. The leading hypothesis in cases like mine is that a virus trips the system. It can inflame or injure the hair cells, the nerve, or both, and reduce oxygen availability to very important inner ear tissues. It's a lot like how some people lose their smell or taste after a viral infection like COVID. The structures are still there, but the sensory cells and nerves stop transmitting. Later that Friday, again, this is 3 days from when I first experienced hearing loss, I had my first appointment for a corticosteroid injection with Dr. Yu-Tung Wong at Cedars-Sinai in Los Angeles. Here's a clip from a video that I recorded on my phone as I was walking into this appointment. So I'm at Cedars-Sinai here in LA. Pretty scary actually. I'm heading in now to do a injection into my left ear. So yeah, let's see how that pans out for me. Never thought I was going to wake up this week and be getting a needle into the ear, that's for sure. And strangely, I've come to terms with it. Dr. Wong performed my first intratympanic injection on that Friday, recommended that I continue with the oral prednisone, and also wrote a referral for hyperbaric oxygen therapy. While there's limited evidence that intratympanic corticosteroid injections are more effective than oral corticosteroids for treating sudden sensorineural hearing loss, there is some evidence. And I quote from a 2023 review, "The use of both intratympanic and systemic steroids together is likely superior to either used alone. And intratympanic steroids likely offer additional benefit as a secondary salvage therapy in patients who fail initial systemic steroid therapy." End quote. There's also some evidence to suggest that intratympanic corticosteroid injections are more effective in subjects that have severe or profound sudden sensorineural hearing loss. And I have to say, as unpleasant as the idea of a needle piercing the eardrum sounds and feels, I sucked it up and ended up getting 3 of these injections without anesthesia at day 3, day 8, and day 10 post-hearing loss. Most people still think of creatine as something only for athletes. But while creatine is certainly good for muscle health, that's only part of this mighty supplement's story. Researchers at the University of Kansas Medical Center are even studying creatine today for treating Alzheimer's, with preliminary data suggesting that high doses, around 20 grams per day, can increase brain creatine levels by about 11% in Alzheimer's patients, which may result in improved cognitive function. While the data here is certainly emerging, it's a very positive early signal in a field of science that has thus far largely failed to find helpful interventions. My personal dose of creatine is 10 grams of Momentus's creatine monohydrate per day, but I am open to increasing it to 20 grams per day as more evidence becomes available. When I'm consistent with this, I notice faster recovery, better focus, and more sustained energy. And with Momentus's new lemon creatine travel packs, it is easier than ever before to stay consistent. Naturally flavored, perfectly portioned, and simple to mix with water wherever you are. And every batch is NSF certified for sport, independently tested for purity, label accuracy, and banned substances. So if you want a creatine that's clean, third-party tested, convenient, and effective, look no further. Head to livemomentus.com and use the code LIVINGPROOF for up to 35% off your first order. That's livemomentus.com and use the code LIVINGPROOF at checkout for up to 35% off your first order. For those watching, here's a short clip of one of those injections. And if you're someone that does get a little wheezy, you might want to look away. How would I describe how this felt? There's a sharp pain as the needle pierces the eardrum, but that's over pretty quickly. And then you get pain as the steroid is injected into the middle ear. And from what I understand, this pain is from increasing pressure. You're squeezing fluid into a very tight space. You experience intense vertigo with the room spinning for about 30 seconds, and then you lie down for 30 minutes with your ear facing up to allow the fluid to drain from the middle ear to the inner ear. The idea being that you get this anti-inflammatory corticosteroid fluid to the very place where the inflammation is around the auditory nerve. I did these injections without anesthesia, not because I'm big and strong, far from it, but there is some data that suggests at least local anesthesia that contains phenol is associated with increased risk of tympanic membrane perforation, essentially the hole from the needle not healing over fully. And this can often be treated without surgery, but there is a risk that surgery is required. So for me, the decision was pretty simple: grit my teeth, experience a pinch of sharp pain, and then improve my odds of the hole in my eardrum healing without any issues. I ended up tolerating the injections well, as you can hear from my audiologist here, who recorded a video of what my eardrum looked like after the 3 injections.
Took those injections for you there. But everything looks good, intact. I'm not seeing any perforations. And your eardrums are moving nicely too.
So to quickly recap, because this is the most important part of my treatment, I took oral corticosteroids and I had 3 intratympanic corticosteroid injections. Specifically, I started oral prednisone at 60 milligrams per day within 36 hours of experiencing hearing loss. And I continued with 60 milligrams per day, splitting that dose in the morning and night for 7 days before tapering down slowly over the following 2 weeks. All up, I was on oral corticosteroids for around 3 weeks. Again, remember, meta-analyses consistently show better odds of recovery if steroids are started early, ideally within the first 72 hours of hearing loss. And on top of that, I had 3 intratympanic dexamethasone injections at day 3, day 8, and day 10 post sudden hearing loss. And oral valacyclovir, the antiviral just-in-case measure, which was 3 1,000 milligram tablets per day at breakfast, lunch, and dinner for 7 days. One medicine that I didn't take, which is not recommended in the US guidelines, but is suggested as a treatment option in the Japan Sudden Sensorineural Hearing Loss Guidelines, is PGE1, which is a vasodilator that's used to improve inner ear blood circulation. If you get sudden sensorineural hearing loss, this is something that I would research and speak to your ENT about. In addition to oral prednisone, the corticosteroid injections, and valacyclovir, I also underwent hyperbaric oxygen therapy. The rationale here is backed by evidence. A 2022 meta-analysis of randomized controlled trials found that adding hyperbaric oxygen therapy to steroids improved average hearing thresholds by about 10 decibels, and it quadrupled the odds of recovery compared to steroids alone. Importantly, there is some evidence suggesting that the benefit of hyperbaric oxygen therapy appears even greater in younger people and in people with severe to profound hearing loss like I experienced. And the mechanism here makes sense. The cochlea and its delicate hair cells have a very high metabolic requirement or need, but a very limited blood supply. Hyperbaric oxygen therapy increases the amount of oxygen dissolved in plasma, driving more oxygen into the inner ear tissues that may have been injured as a result of low oxygen availability. The idea being that this enhanced oxygen delivery helps stressed or partially damaged hair cells recover, rather than tipping them over into permanent dysfunction. While an optimal hyperbaric oxygen therapy protocol is not definitively established, most evidence suggests that you should do at least 5 sessions and potentially 10 to 20 sessions depending on how you respond, with each session going from 90 to 120 minutes at a pressure level of 2 to 2.5 atmospheres absolute. Starting on day 4 after my hearing loss, which was Saturday morning, I did 16 hours in a hyperbaric oxygen therapy at Oxy Renew in Los Angeles. 8 consecutive sessions, each one was 2 hours long at 2 atmospheres absolute up until day 11. There were some other things that I tried. These certainly weren't the foundation of my treatment, and I can't say for sure whether they helped or not, but I did add them to my regime, if you will, because the risks seemed to be low and there was some soft evidence suggesting that they may be of benefit. The first was supplements. I added 1,200 milligrams of N-acetylcysteine, or NAC, per day to my daily supplements. We're not going to do a deep dive on this today, but there is some interesting research suggesting that NAC may reduce hair cell death, those important cells that we spoke about in the inner ear that convert vibration into electrical signals, by reducing oxidative stress. And this may be particularly true when taken in conjunction with oral corticosteroids. There's some evidence, albeit limited, suggesting that acupuncture plus Western medicine may improve recovery for patients with sudden sensory neural hearing loss compared to Western medicine alone. I also added a high-dose magnesium supplement and continued taking the IM8 Daily Ultimate Essentials Plus multivitamin, along with Momentus's creatine monohydrate and omega-3 DHA and EPA. And of course, it goes without saying, I continued to focus on eating a healthy, plant-based, high-fiber, colorful, whole food diet. To make things easier, because I appreciate this may be a lot, I've created a PDF that summarized everything I did with the specific details, which you can access in the show notes. Before wellness was a trend, Bragg was already setting the standard. More than 100 years ago, Paul and Patricia Bragg believed that health wasn't about chasing quick fixes. It was about finding balance and choosing what works. That's how Bragg Live Foods was born, America's original health food company. Today, Bragg continues to deliver on that mission with their time-tested, apple cider vinegar. Unlike passing wellness trends, their recipe has been trusted for generations thanks to gut-loving ingredients like acetic acid. It's raw, USDA organic, naturally fermented, unfiltered, and most importantly, unpasteurized. In every format, from the original liquid apple cider vinegar to flavorful apple cider vinegar blends to their convenient sugar-free apple cider vinegar supplements, Bragg is still offering a dose of what works. Visit bragg.com and use the promo code SIMON to get 20% off your first order. That's promo code SIMON at bragg.com. Okay, so that's what happened and how I treated it. You're probably wondering whether or not my hearing returned. If it did, how quickly and by how much. First things first, for 7 days, I had no functional hearing improvement. Nothing at all. These were some of the hardest days that I've personally faced when it comes to my health, and certainly when it comes to my psychology, my mindset. I remember I would wake up and I'd quickly realize I had no hearing in my left ear, and I would just slip straight into imagining my new life. Would I be able to podcast? Was enjoying music, playing the guitar, having conversations in loud environments, were all of these things going to be forever different? What if I lost hearing in my other ear? This was the worst thought I had. I wouldn't be able to hear Tawny's voice again. All the cute things that she whispers into my ear. I may not ever hear the voice of my kids. If my hearing didn't come back, I'd be at increased risk of dementia, etc., etc. These were the devastating thoughts that I had that broke me multiple times. It's crazy how quickly our psyche can slip into doom and gloom. When I found myself in this place, I had this very strange experience, tension between two thoughts that I was holding at the same time. A dualism of sorts. On one hand, I'd never been more grateful for so many things in my life. And on the other hand, I was extremely scared for what my future may hold. I'd sit with this, take a few breaths, and then come back to what can I control? The only single thing that I could do was get up and stick with the program. Everything else, a whole range of possibilities, would just be. And I got to be comfortable with that. I was taking all of this very seriously. I kidded to people that I was approaching this like Tom Brady approached his training. I was on the medications. I was getting the injections into my ear. I was doing 2 hours of hyperbaric every single day, plus a 1 hour commute to and from. And on top of that, I was doing acupuncture every other day. And I prioritized sleep and removed as much stress from my life as possible. And believe it or not, I proactively sought out humor, things that would make me laugh. I remember I kidded at one stage when people asked how I was doing that I wasn't too bad for a bloke with the sense knocked out of him. And some people laughed. Some weren't sure if they were allowed to laugh. I laughed, and that felt good. And on that note, I remember I had this weird experience with people checking in on me. On one hand, it felt great to be thought of, but it was also very deflating to keep repeating that there was no improvement. And honestly, there was a part of me that didn't want to put that out into the world, so I actually didn't tell too many people that I was experiencing this. While I had no functional improvement in my hearing in the first week, meaning that I couldn't hear someone speak or music or even the sound of a car passing by with my left ear, I did observe some small, subtle changes. Around day 4, I was noticing some random pings and ringing, mostly at night, what I believe is described as tinnitus. This was super annoying. It sounded like spaceships zooming around in my ear and little random robotic voices in my ear. I thought I was genuinely going crazy at this point. There was also a shift from what was complete silence and like a mute ear to an intermittent sort of offline static background noise. It's like a very low grade shh. And then around day 5 or 6, that static grew into a more constant white noise. It was actually quite pleasant. And every now and then I'd get the fleeting whistles or tones or spaceships on top of that. Soon after, my own voice started to sound less lopsided. Instead of hearing my own voice entirely in my right ear, it felt a little more centered, although it was still very mechanical and distorted. By the end of the first week, I could, for the first time, faintly hear the sound of my fingers rubbing together next to my left ear. I remember hearing that noise for the first time, and if I was to describe that feeling in one word, and I'm doing it now, I think it would be relief or perhaps surreal. For me, this indicated real progress towards a full recovery, which I wasn't sure if it was possible. A few days later, I started picking up road noise and some other environmental sounds. And with headphones at higher volumes, I could actually begin to make out words in that ear for the first time. From days 7 to 10, it felt like I was getting at least 20% improvement day on day. I recall this bizarre experience watching TV. I noticed a kind of echo, as if the left side was processing sound slightly out of sync with the right. So an actor would say a word like hello, and I would process it through my right ear, and then I would hear the same word come in through the left ear a millisecond later. Another very, very strange experience. And I'm really pleased to report that by the second audiogram, just 10 days after onset, the improvement was dramatic. No longer severe to profound deafness or hearing loss, but only a mild hearing loss with 100% speech recognition. Subjectively, it felt like I had gone from total silence to having my left ear switched back online. And as you're about to hear, my audiologist was pretty surprised.
I've seen quite a few patients, but not as many as I'm sure a lot of my peers now and colleagues now that have been in this field for a long time. And I've seen some good outcomes, and I've seen some where they just doesn't come back. So when I saw it, it was pretty shocking, and I was a little bit worried, just because of how young you are and how sudden it was, but also pretty promising on how fast you acted on it. Not a lot of people do that. As long as you're able to get to it within the first 36 hours, like you did. I mean, you got the MRI done, you got the steroids done, the hearing test. I mean, you got it done so quick. So I had high hopes for you, but I was a little nervous because of how profound it was. So the degrees at which there could be a sudden hearing loss can vary, but it was such a big loss. I mean, if we're comparing it to your last hearing test, I mean, this is great. You understood 100% of the words this time in the left ear. You're getting present OAEs and present reflexes in the left ear. I mean, this is great. This is great. So I would say keep doing what you're doing. The amount of improvement you've had from the previous appointment is fantastic. It's fantastic.
I'm due to go back in for a final audiogram in a few weeks to see if the mild hearing loss at the 4,000 hertz frequency has recovered, and I'll be sure to report back. What I can say is that listening to music, watching TV, playing the guitar, having conversations in quiet and in loud environments, I cannot notice any difference. My hearing in my left ear seems just as good as my right, and there's no limitations. So it's an absolute understatement to say that I'm stoked with my recovery. What can we attribute my recovery to? Was it the corticosteroids? Was it the hyperbaric? Was it the acupuncture? Was it the supplements, the NAC? Was it a combination of some of these things, or would I have just recovered naturally without any intervention? The truth is, and the pragmatic answer here is that we don't know. That's why controlled clinical trials are so vital to our understanding of how to treat health conditions best. The clinical trial data that we have best supports corticosteroids and hyperbaric oxygen therapy for treating the condition that I had. How much they explained my individual recovery, we don't know. And to be honest, at least to me, it doesn't matter. I got my hearing back. That's what matters. One mistake that I will not make is to be fooled by my anecdote. I could easily go around promoting NAC now as a supplement that cured my hearing loss and has amazing antioxidant potential, overlooking all of the other variables at play that may have explained my recovery, which is sadly an all too common mistake that we frequently see online today. In closing here, this experience taught me several things. First, if you ever notice sudden, unexplained hearing loss, treat this as an emergency. Go see an ENT immediately. If you can't, go to the ER. And once you're there, advocate strongly for yourself so that you can get an ENT involved as soon as possible. Second, if sudden sensorineural hearing loss is suspected, act quickly and follow the evidence-based guidelines. This really is a true medical emergency, and your chance of making a full recovery could be affected by how quickly you commence treatment. When it comes to an evidence-based treatment protocol, that means starting oral corticosteroids with or without corticosteroid injections, ideally within 3 days, and certainly within 2 weeks of experiencing hearing loss. And if you can access hyperbaric oxygen therapy, do at least 5 consecutive sessions at 2 hours each at 2 atmospheres absolute, again within that 2-week window. Ideally 10 to 20 sessions if you can. And get an MRI to rule out a tumor or a vascular issue. Those are the big 3 things that can really make a difference. Finally, this whole ordeal experience reminded me about why I'm so committed to my health and to this podcast. Our health underpins everything about the human experience. And sometimes losing it, even for a moment, is the sharpest reminder not to take it for granted. This experience pushed me to reframe how I look at the lifestyle choices that we talk about here so often. Eating well, exercising, prioritizing sleep. These aren't chores that we have to do. They are privileges that we get to do. They are investments that we make into our body, in our mind, and ultimately our life. And before we land the plane here and I let you go, I do want to say a huge thank you to my partner, Tony, and her mum, Laurie, who both helped me immensely throughout all of this. I love you both. To the doctors that I received advice from, including Doctors Vanessa Rothschild and Dr. Jessica Lee, both incredible ENTs, and my audiologist, Preston Thompson. Big thank you to each of you for your support. All right, on that note, we did it. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. Always a pleasure to be with you, and I look forward to catching you next week. Oh, you're still here. Sticking around for a cheap laugh. I'm on to you, cheeky bugger. I'm on to you. Okay, here goes. Let's see what we can do. 2 friends were talking to each other, and one said to the other, maybe you need hearing aids. Maybe you should think about going and getting a hearing test. And the other person said, why would I need a hairy chest? I feel like this is one of those ones where I need to say, get it? Hearing test, hairy chest. Anyway, let me know in the comments. See you guys next week. There you have it, friends. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did and want to stay up to date with future episodes, be sure to hit that subscribe button on YouTube and follow on Apple or Spotify. Finally, thank you for showing up and the effort that you're making to take control of your health. I look forward to hanging out with you again in the next episode.